Taylor Swift, the Cold War, micro-publishers. What do these have in common? Let's find out on this episode of the Admiral's Almanac. I recently put out a teaser that the Admiral's Almanac would launch a 6-episode series on writing. The more I thought about it, I felt we should have a pre-series episode with our guide to writing a book people want to read. So let's jump into this episode with George Galdorisi and Kevin McDonald, authors of Braveship Writers Share Their Secrets, How to Write a Book People Actually Read. And welcome back to the Admiral's Almanac. I'm your host, Rear Admiral Gary Hall, and today we've got a couple of guests that I think are going to be very informative and fun to talk with. I have the authors of a new book published, and it's available on Amazon. The book is Braveship Writers Share Their Secrets. Not sure what a brave ship is, but we'll find out. So my guests are Kevin McDonald and George Galdorisi. George has been here often. Good morning, George. Can you say hello?
Yeah, good morning, Gary, and thanks so much for having us on the show.
All right. And Kevin, you're the first time joining the Admiral's Almanac. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Gary. Thank you very much. And George told me that this podcast is audio only. Is that correct?
That is correct, because I have a face for radio and a voice for email.
So you're telling me that I shaved, took a shower, and put on this clean shirt for nothing?
Absolutely. But maybe your friends, colleagues, and family, and maybe even your dog will appreciate that. So Kevin, why don't you talk first and tell us, what is your relationship with George Galdorisi?
I graduated from flight school in 1984. Was fortunate enough to graduate at the top of my class. And at that time, there were very few H-60 slots available. I was lucky enough to get one, ended up at HSL 43 at North Island. George was the XO when I got there. There was a change of command about halfway through my tour. So George was my second CO in my first fleet squadron.
All right. And for people that don't know, HSL stood for Helicopter Anti-Submarine Warfare Light, and HSL 43 was a squadron in Coronado, California. And George, tell us a little bit about what was it like having Kevin join you in your squadron?
No, it was great. We liked Kevin. I don't think Kevin thought that we liked him, because we sent him out to on deployment soon after he got there on the USS Valley Forge, where he served Gareth, one of your classmates. Jim Stavridis was the ops officer at the time, so he and Kevin go way back into antiquity.
Well, that's a real example of, it's a small Navy. All three of you, well, I guess now that I'm published, all four of us were in the Navy and now writers. And that's really what we want to talk about. So, George, tell us, what is Braveship?
Yeah, so I think if you work it from the biggest to the smallest, there are five big publishers, all established in New York City: Simon & Schuster, McDonald, and others. And then there's another tier of publishers. I think some of them are academic publishers and others. And then there's something called micro publishers. And Braveship was started by a former Navy guy, Jeff Edwards, who wanted to bring together a cabal of writers who actually knew each other and worked together, as opposed to big publishing houses where they're strangers to each other. So he's got about 18 of us under his roof. He is our publisher and editor. He rejects far more manuscripts than he accepts, and we as fellow writers are beta readers for each other, and that sort of thing. So it's nice. It's kind of like a fraternity. It's nice to have a group of writers that know and support each other.
Now, Braveship, does it do both fiction and nonfiction, or is it mostly adventure fiction?
It's primarily fiction. When we go to book fairs and places like that, Jeff holds up a sign that says, if we're not keeping you up at night, we're not doing our job. So most of the writers are focused on thrillers, but there is a niche for nonfiction books, and I think we'll grow that part of it because nonfiction books vastly outnumber novels.
Hey, Kevin, so what... your email has Kevin McDonald, author, in it. So what got you started writing in the first place?
I guess there's a air of prestige that a lot of people think goes along with being a writer. But when you get right down to it, like the three of us, for example, all three of us have published books. We had lives before that. We all three of us were naval aviators. We were helicopter pilots to boot, which, for those in your audience who are not familiar with the way naval aviation works, that means we were unrestricted aviators. We could fly fixed wing or helicopter. So bottom line is all three of us were pretty awesome before we ever sat down and picked up a pen to start writing. So I don't think any of the three of us were, looking for prestige when we began writing. For me personally, the impetus was my wife. I think she got tired of every time we walked into a bar having to listen to me regale everyone around us with sea stories and stories of my superior airmanship. And so she finally got tired of it and said, why don't you just write all this stuff down and be done with it?
Well, I can share that similarity in that, yes, I'm always at the bar regaling people with great sea stories. And my wife finally said, yeah, write them down. Where's your book? And I said, it's in this pen. I just have to squeeze it out. So, George, did you have any, training for writing? I know we all have engineering or technical type degrees, but did you have any writing training?
Gary, the answer is absolutely not. We went to the same school, Naval Academy, otherwise known as the Chesapeake Institute of Naval Technology, and that was at the height of the Cold War. So we were inundated with technical subjects, physics, chemistry, electrical engineering, you name it, and if it gives you any indication of how little we learned that would help us write, we called our 1 or 2 English courses we took in 4 years bull. So no training, actually negative training. But then, and part of the reason we did the book is not to get all misty-eyed about it is once I did get the urge to write, I had a lot of mentors holding my hand, guys like Dick Couch helping me along. So, armed with that background, we just wanted to pay it forward and share with other beginning, emerging, and even accomplished writers.
Hey, Kevin, can you, tell us a little bit more about your writing? We understand you're served in the squadron with George as your executive officer and commanding officer, but can you tell us a little bit, what is the writing relationship between you two?
I didn't get to attend a vocational school the way you two guys did, so I went to the University of Texas on a Navy scholarship. My entire focus at that point was get the degree so I can get the commission, so I can go to flight school. I wanted to be a naval aviator. That was my goal in life. And unfortunately, I had to have the degree, so I had to pick a major. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, what's the easiest degree I can get so that I can satisfy the requirement to have a college degree and move on to the important stuff, which is going to flight school. And I remembered having read somewhere when I was in high school that Mark Twain famously said, if you fail at everything else, you can take up journalism. And so that's how I became a journalism major at the University of Texas.
All right. So, but have you written with George? You're with...
Yes. Yes. In fact, going back to that previous story about my wife finally laying down the law and telling me to write all these stories down instead of just pass them along to the guy on the next bar stool. When I finally retired, when I got out of the Navy, I flew for 20 years as a public safety helicopter pilot in Austin, in Travis County. And so when I retired from that, my wife correctly assumed that I needed something else to keep me busy. And that's when I started writing. And at that point, I had already read George's first novel, The Coronado Conspiracy. And I thought, wow, this is way cool, that somebody I know actually published a book. And so when I got ready to sit down and start writing my book, I tracked George down. He was still in Coronado, and he was basically my mentor and helped me immensely. I think there are a lot of other people in my place. George helps people left and right. If he finds out you have the slightest interest in writing, he'll take you under his wing. And that's what he did with me.
Super. So, George, why did you write this book? And again, I'll give the title. It's Braveship, Writers Share Their Secrets, How to Write Books People Actually Read. And we'll talk about the part about people actually read. So why did you guys write this book?
So it kind of goes back to the last question. Why would you want more competition in the market when you're trying to sell your own books? And so the answer is, bad books drive everybody out of the reading mode. So we wanted to, like I said, share things that we learned along the way, both in writing and doing writing seminars, so people wouldn't have to struggle. And Kevin would probably say the same thing. And you would, Gary, you run into friends in the grocery store and they say, I've got a great idea for a book. I said, what kind of book is it? Well, it's a novel, or it's a memoir of my grandpa's experiences of World War II. And, those are worthy projects, but if you've not written anything ever before, it's a big rock up a steep hill. So our book, without being a textbook-y, just brings people from the ground up, how to get started writing something where you get feedback, maybe from a magazine article, or the editor gives you feedback, and you start developing, those juices. So that's the main reason we wrote the book, to help people make their journey easier, not have to struggle with it.
And I'll jump in here also, Gary. I wrote the book because George ordered me to write the book.
Okay.
And I couldn't say no. And I say that only halfway kidding, because I was pretty skeptical when George first approached me about this project. George's approach to writing and mine they're not the same, I guess is the best way to put it. And although I did discover, when we actually started writing the book and breaking down, how you go about, coming up with story ideas, high concepts and narrative outlines and log lines and all this stuff that, that we cover in the book, I did finally figure out that when I sit down to write a book, I'm more like George than I was willing to admit. It's just that George is a little bit more efficient in that he does all this stuff on paper, and I kind of do it as I go along. But I have a narrative outline. It's just that it's not on paper. And but having said that, the point I was about to make was I was pretty skeptical. But George sounded pretty optimistic about this project, and I have to admit, by the time we finished it, I think it turned out really well. I was impressed with, what we were able to put together. Yeah,
as all of us being naval aviators, we have tactics, techniques, and procedures. So really, it translates, over. We all have the same tactics and procedures, but we might have a little bit different techniques. So is this book written for beginners or experienced writers or middle of the road writers? Who is it for?
All of the above. And again, one of the nice things about the book and the fact that it was a collaborative effort is, if you're an experienced writer, you're still going to learn things from this book because you get George's perspective. George has been doing this for a long time. And he's got a pretty impressive resume, New York Times bestseller. And then, you also get my perspective. I'm kind of following in George's footsteps. So I'm at a different stage of my writing career than George is. So I think that helped us to actually put things down on paper that are going to benefit people on different parts of the literary spectrum with regard to their writing career.
Right. Now, George, I want to ask about the subtitle, which is How to Write Books People Actually Read. What do you bring with Braveheart or Braveship writers share their secrets that other books don't bring as far as how to get people to actually read books? Is there a process to that?
Well, yeah. First of all, piling on to what Kevin said, we didn't just wake up one Tuesday morning with a blank sheet of paper and say, let's write a book. I have been doing writing seminars here in Coronado for about 4 or 5 years, and 6 2-hour seminars. And as I went along, I would ask the people in the seminars to do a survey at the end and tell me more of this or less of this. So it kind of evolved into people at all stages of writing and what they wanted to learn. And then also trying to scratch that itch of what's the right thing to write. I have one woman in my class, Joyce, who had written a 220,000 word apocalyptic dystopian story that was kind of like really, really out there and would only appeal to a few readers. And then we were having a conversation once, and I said, well, what are you doing this summer? She said, well, we're doing what we do every summer. My husband and I and our 3 kids are traveling to Europe, and we backpack for 2.5 months until school starts again. And our family rule is the only thing you could take with you is what you could fit in one backpack. And I said, George, that's your book. I mean, how many people go on vacation with 6 pieces of luggage and people want to know how to trim it down and do that. And so she's writing that book right now. And I think it'll be great. But, part of the reason for our book, going back to your exact question, is helping people find what their niche is. Is it a novel? Is it a memoir? And if it is a novel, what kind of novel, and breaking down some of that basic blocking and tackling before they embark on a project, and realize, there's no market for that.
So what I want to tease out of what you said was, through teaching, you gained lessons learned. And so those lessons learned will help people write a book that actually will be read, or write an article or a journal piece that will actually be read. And I think to our roles in the Navy as flight instructors, we were all pretty darn good pilots. But then when you became a flight instructor, by teaching others, you became even better because you were aware of what is good and what is bad in others. And then it made you introspective. So I think there's another connection between writing in the military. So Kevin, what do you think about, should everybody write? What do you think? My thesis is leaders need to write. And so, instead of just thinking about writing a book, where do we start?
Well, one of the things we talk about in the book is you definitely don't want to start with a book length project. If you're serious about becoming a writer, George and I both, even though, like I say, he's a lot farther along in his writing career than I am, he and I both started writing articles for professional journals and local magazines, Texas Monthly, magazines like this. And that's really where you need to start, so that you start getting feedback from people who are professional editors. One of the things we point out is if you dive right into writing the great American novel, and then an editor doesn't see it until you've written 100,000 words in your manuscript, you're going to be greatly disappointed when you find out that you may have just wasted about 1.5 years of your life because you have to go back and start over because you haven't learned the basic building blocks.
Yes. And, I mentioned my book earlier and I got that published, but I had written editorials in military or defense magazines. I'd written opinion pieces, and then just for fun, I wrote stories. And when George held a seminar, we were at a writing seminar at the Navy Helicopter Association convention this year, I told some of the young kids, write about one of your flights. You go out there and you always have an adventure. What kind of issues derail those trying to write, especially those trying to write thrillers? Kevin mentioned, you could waste a year and a half writing and not be where you should be.
Yeah. So I think, piling on to what Kevin said, and not to keep beating the drum for this, I think, there probably are people who wake up one Thursday morning and sit down and write a 100,000 word novel that gets published and does well. We just don't know any of them. So what the three of us have done in starting out with articles, and you get feedback from an editor, and you really learn along the way that that's just not the way you do it. And so I think that's the number one pitfall, is just trying to start pushing that huge rock up a steep hill. The other things that come up, particularly in writing seminars, is someone says, yeah, I'm going to write this novel because I know it'll be great for Hollywood, and then I'll make, 10 times as much money, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I don't know anyone who's set out to do that and has succeeded, because you're not writing prose that someone's going to actually read. You're jumping around. I'll give you an example. When Dick Couch and I did the novelization of the movie Act of Valor, if you've seen that movie, you'll notice that in one scene, the SEALs are in Costa Rica and they're just finishing up their mission. And then it switches to a scene where there are a bunch of SEALs jumping out of a helicopter and swimming ashore in Africa. Well, you can get away with that in the movie, but in the book, people are going, how the heck did they get there? And what happened in between? So, trying to do something because you think it's going to be a Hollywood hit is kind of a fool's errand. And then the other thing people get caught up in is, well, I've got to keep all this secret because someone will steal my great idea, and, they'll write the novel instead of me. That's just, that doesn't happen, because your idea, how many Frankenstein novels have been written? Scores. So there's no new ideas. It's just a question of how you do it and what you put into it. So
Kevin, there's many options to get published. As you said, as George said earlier, Braveship, rejects as many as it takes to publish. So what are some of the pitfalls, or, what are some of the thoughts on going to self-publishing route, or going to some of the major publishing houses, or should we start writing and get an agent? Those are some of the technical aspects. You've got the writing done, but now you got to get it out there, self-published, publisher, agent.
In the book, George and I encourage people, yes, go out there and find yourself an agent. A lot of people fall back on self-publishing as a last resort, once they figure out that nobody wants their project. And as a result, the self-publishing side of the industry, for lack of a better way to express it, is somewhat tainted, because we all know you can go up on Amazon and find book after book after book that is literally garbage, no professional editing, no formatting, and, they're just not very good. But, with the advent of Amazon and KDP and self-publishing, the door is wide open. George talks about the big five, and, that era may be coming to an end sooner than later, but at least you had gatekeepers back then, so that when you walked into a bookstore and you picked up a book and you paid money for it, you at least could expect that, there was a subject and a verb in most of the sentences. And so that's not really the case anymore. So I would say the biggest pitfall for people who fall back on self-publishing is, thinking that they can do it all, and they can't. And I was found on that just a little bit. even if you're going the self-publishing route, you need to hire an editor. You need to hire somebody to format your book. You're going to have to hire somebody to design the cover. You're not going to be able to do all this by yourself. And if you do, people are going to be able to recognize that you did it all by yourself.
Excellent point. And there are options out there that don't cost you an arm and a leg as far as editing and design and formatting. I mean, might not cost you thousands and thousands.
Sorry, can I pile on to that? So,
yes, George.
Yeah, in the book, we first of all, you mentioned publishing, direct to a publishing house, agent, or self-publish. The days when you could throw something over the transom to a publishing house and have them even look at it are gone forever. I mean, they used to have interns who went through what they call the slush pile and tried to find that nice nugget in there. They don't exist anymore. The advice we give to people in the book is if you're looking for an agent, there are thousands of agents and you can exhaust yourself reaching out to all of them. So what we suggest to people that this should be of use to your listeners who are on this path, you have your book idea, you have your log line, and you go to the library. You look for books like yours. And most writers are kind enough to thank their agents. So you go to another book in the library, find the list of those agents and contact them and say, I see you just agented Sammy Smith's book XYZ. And my book is the same genre and it's a little more contemporary or, reveals new information or something. And now the agent knows you've done your due diligence and so a lot more likely to at least have a conversation with you. Having said all that, if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, there's a woman, Colleen Hoover, who is famous. She is self-published and is knocking it out of the park with multiple books. So, but she is, she's a rare exception because like Kevin says, and I can just give me another 30 seconds. Another co-author and I just did a book for the Naval Institute about artificial intelligence. So here are the people in the process at a publisher who were involved in making the book better. There's an acquisition editor who kind of looks at the 100,000 foot level thing and helps you understand, where your book fits and are there any pitfalls. And then there's a regular editor like Kevin suggests. And then there's a copy editor. And then there's someone who formats the book and someone who designs the cover. So if you're self-publishing, you've got to do all of that and do it well. So again, there are people like Colleen Hoover who did it. Who are now very wealthy. But like I said, she's few and far between.
While we're on the editing subject, you were talking earlier about, when you became a flight instructor, it made you a better aviator because you were forced to explain to someone else what you were doing. And I started out editing long before I ever sat down and started to write my own book. And if someone is serious about wanting to write books, that's a real good way to get some training is to take on some editing projects because it forces you to figure out what makes a good book and what makes a bad book.
Exactly. And if you're doing your own editing, I think, the old saying, you're drinking your own bathwater. And so in my book, I had a grammar editor, somebody that just went through and checked for punctuation, spelling, and grammar. And then I had a continuity editor. Then I had the major editor that went through that was also a best-selling author. And then a formatter, and then reading it again, printing a copy, reading it, checking it. I don't think anybody, no matter how qualified you are, can do all the editing themselves.
And exactly. And your bathwater example is spot on. And when I say, editing is a good way to start out in the literary world, obviously I'm talking about editing for other people. You're exactly right. Anyone who thinks he can edit his own work is a fool. It's like it works that way with physicians and it works that way with writers.
Yeah. Just across town from me is an old squadron mate, shipmate, and his daughter has a degree in writing and literary sciences, and she's writing books, but she's also editing. So a combination of, the editing improves her writing. George, in this book, do you talk about or cover the getting your presence out there, your social media, your website? Is any of that covered in the book?
It is. Again, the days that the five major publishers would take your book, publish your book, and then send you on a multi-city book tour are gone forever, unless your name is, Al Pacino or Taylor Swift. So even when you make your proposal, they ask you things like, send us a link to your website. Tell us how many followers you have on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. So the strong expectation is that you do their marketing for them. So if you were to tell them you don't have a website, they'll fall off their chairs laughing. And if you tell them you have only 17 Twitter followers, they're not feeling like you're going to be helpful marketing the book. So those things are as necessary as calling cards were 20 years ago. So
even if somebody has a book published, and I'll use myself as an example, I've got a book published on Amazon.com, I can still learn from your book. Is that correct? I mean, even about the book that's already published, I can learn from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's many ways to have a website. You can design it yourself. You can have someone design it and pay someone to keep it up. So, we try to lay out those, as you said, techniques and procedures, how to not go broke marketing your book.
Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, the subtitle to the book is How to Write Books People Actually Read. And George is correct. When we sat down and started this project, we wanted to go beyond just the nuts and bolts of, syntax and adverbs and metaphors and all the things that go along with writing a book. We also wanted to deal with what happens once you have your manuscript in hand. And then even beyond that, once your book is published, how do you actually get it into people's hands? And so we cover all of that in this book. And I think that's what separates this book from a lot of the other books on writing that you can find out there is, we spend a lot of time teaching people how to market their book.
Now, George, we have committed to a 6-episode podcast series on writing, and I just released a podcast today that announces that. Tell us what we'll learn in these 6 episodes of how to write and getting published.
Yeah, well, going back to the earlier question, Gary, and I use those writing seminars as the grist to not only inform this book, but to do the podcast. And again, it's a way that we both feel is engineering people from success. In fact, the first thing we do is get people, out of the starting blocks, because there are many people who think like writers are this special cast of people, and there's them, and then there's us. And without being Tony Robbins about it and saying, you can do it, we point out that, the oldest profession that mankind has is writing. And we use as an example the 40 millennia old cave paintings, because when Ugg or whatever his name was went out to slay the saber-tooth tiger and brought it back to the cave, he didn't just throw it on the ground and say, enjoy your meal, because he couldn't say enjoy your meal because there was no language. So what did he do? He drew pictures that were likely embellished of him fighting multiple saber-tooth tigers and slaying them, etc. This is something in our DNA. So everyone can write if they choose to. And what we try to do in the book is to show people a way to do it without, trying to write that 200,000 word opus and have it just live in a desk drawer for the rest of their lives.
Will your book be helpful as a textbook as we go through this 6 series of how to write and how to get published?
Yeah, I think as we do each series, there'll be PowerPoint slides that we use and prose that we use that will leave for the reader that they can access from listening to your podcast. But then also, if they go to the book, they'll get more granularity. Like I said, it's a difference between a 90-minute movie and a 350-page novel. that you get more granularity in the book than you do during the podcast.
Okay, so I think it'll be a combination of hitting all the senses of sight, sound, and visual to learn. So, Kevin, wrap this up. Give us, why do I want to buy this book, and what is the best takeaway?
I think the takeaway from the book: you can't be a good writer unless you're an avid reader, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. One of the reasons that editing prepares you to write your own material is because you learn what makes for a good book and what doesn't make for a good book. And it would be like if you sat down, to write your great American novel and you'd never read a novel, it would be like sitting down and trying to produce a movie when you've never actually been to a movie. And, so how do you know what's good and what's not? So I guess what I'm trying to say is we try to impress upon people in the book that if you're not an avid reader, then maybe you're not really cut out to be a writer either. And the other major takeaway is you should never approach, at least fiction writing, you should never approach it as an entrepreneurial exercise. Now, having said that, I will point out that I bought a copy of your book, and I'm pretty sure George bought a copy of your book. So I think this obligates you to buy 2 copies of our book. But that notwithstanding, if you're in it for the money or even the fame and fortune, that George talked about earlier, is, good luck. I guess you might make it, but it's kind of like it's kind of like playing golf. I mean, I'm an amateur golfer. I'm a 6 handicap. I'm pretty good. But I'm never going to make a living playing golf. So why do I do it? Well, I do it because it's hard to express the satisfaction you experience and the gratification from a well-struck golf ball. And it's the same thing with your writing. One of the things that we say in the book is write a book that you would enjoy reading. And I guess that's the major takeaway.
And that's perfect advice. George, do you want to wrap up the conversation here?
Yeah, no, thanks. And just kind of segueing off what Kevin said, my first agent always said, write what you're passionate about. Because, if you look at the bestseller list and it has romance novels are kind of doing well there, then you say, I'm going to write a romance novel. But by the time it gets published, comes out of the other end of that sausage machine, the public's moved on and something else, they're passionate about something else. So, write what you're passionate about and let the chips fall where they may. So I think that's the strongest advice we give folks in the book is follow your passion. And like Kevin said, I've been to many writing seminars, and each one they have a keynote speaker who's someone who's been a writer and a publishing house person and an agent. And the first thing they say is, if you want to write, don't quit your day job, because there's not a lot of fame and fortune there. It's just the satisfaction of having written that book.
And so for anyone listening right now, what I want you to do is Google George Galdorisi, and his website will come up right away, and you can see what books he has written, and also his slides that we'll be using in the future podcasts. So again, George Galdorisi, Kevin McDonald, authors of their new book on Braveship. Writers give their, well, you tell me what the title is.
Braveship writers share their secrets, how to write books people actually read.
And that's available on Amazon.com. And I did purchase the Kindle version in order to prepare for this discussion today. But I will also be ordering the paper copy because I want to highlight it, write notes in it, fold corners of pages over and refer to it as a textbook to improve my writing. I ask all my listeners, subscribe to the Admiral's Almanac wherever you get your podcasts, and look forward to this special series of learning how to write and get published. So thank you very much. And until we meet again, here's wishing you a happy voyage home. the Admiral's Almanac wherever you get your podcasts. Also, on Amazon.com and BarnesandNobles.com, you can get my new book, Navigating Leadership, Making a Pact with Excellence. Until we meet again, here's wishing you a happy voyage home.